I want to share with you one of the most important stories I think we have captured for us in Acts that prods at our own hearts from Caesarea Maritima. It's found in Acts chapter 12, 20 through 24. It's a story that is probably not a great story for bedtime with your kids. Take that from my own advice. I've shared it with my son, and he's like, "Dad, I can't go to sleep with that in my mind. I can't go to sleep with that in my mind." But it's a powerful story. It's a story of King Herod's death. Now, prior to this, I want you to understand there's all sorts of death that's happening, persecution that's happening. We have James and Peter who are specifically being persecuted by this evil Herod Agrippa. And then we're going to experience his death. What I want to do is I want to read the first few verses, explain to you some context, and then we'll finish out the story. It says in verse 20 of chapter 12, "Now Herod was angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and they came to him on one accord, having persuaded Blastus, the king's chamberlain. They asked for peace, because their country depended on the king's country for food. On an appointed day, Herod put on his royal robe, he took his seat upon the throne, and he delivered an oration to them, and the people were shouting, 'The voice of a God and not of a man.' Immediately, an angel of the Lord struck him down because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and breathed his last." It's a story that should prompt our hearts to say, "Oh Lord, help me not be like that." And let me explain. This man was full of anger specifically at the Christians. Now, hopefully you don't feel that in your heart, but this man, he wanted to get rid of the Christians that were constantly spreading the gospel. He had killed James already. He did that to appease the Jews because the Jews didn't like the spread of Christianity. So he killed James, and then he went and he found Peter and he locked him up. And if you remember, you can peek over and see it at the beginning of chapter 12, he has Peter all locked up, and then God releases Peter. Peter's there, the chains fall off of him, and Peter is now free to go spread the gospel and free from King Herod's grip. Herod wasn't happy about that, so where does he go? Here, to Caesarea. He's frustrated, perhaps to get away from the stress of fighting with Christians. He comes to this place, which was predominantly a Jewish or Roman city. So he didn't have to deal with maybe there's small pockets of Christians, but not large pockets of Christians. The Jews were on his side. The Jews loved him. The Christians, not so much. Imagine the feeling of the early church that would have been here in Caesarea. So many of them would have felt like they were overpowered by this evil king that's out to get them. They're just trying to spread the good news of Jesus Christ. They're just trying to get the message out there. And yet here they continually feel this political opposition, or at least a king who has these whims to kill Christians, prominent apostles. Who was this guy? Well, Herod Agrippa, that it's talking about in here, was the great-grandson of Herod the Great. So we know Herod the Great, right? But he would have been the great-grandson of Herod the Great. He had a major agenda. Number one was to exalt himself. His second agenda was to crush Christians. But the reason that he had an agenda to exalt himself, to crush Christians, was so that he could exalt himself. He knew that if he could get more popular in the Jews' eyes, then only more people would love him. You can see over there in verse 2 and 3, he killed James, this brother of John. He proceeded to arrest Peter. All of this just to exalt himself. Now, we only have a few passages here that tell us about his death, but Josephus, a historian, captures this story for us in all sorts of other detail that I want to bring to life for you. So let me help bring this to life. Let me make sure that the players in the story are clear to you. First of all, God is the main character in this story. Don't be mistaken and think it's Herod. It's God who's actually the main character in this story. It's clear that his power is overall and that he can take life if he sees it fit to take life. And then you have the people of Tyre and Sidon. Now, Tyre and Sidon, these people, I imagine that they're naggy kind of people, right? Especially from the story. Here it looks like they're nagging, saying, "We need you, we need your help." They would have needed the bread basket of Galilee that provided so much food for them. They would have needed the coastline because they didn't have ports and things like they had down here up north where Tyre and Sidon would have been located. These people needed to have a good relationship with Herod and those who were here in Caesarea. While they were coastal cities themselves, they didn't have, like I said, the ports or the access to vegetation that Caesarea would have had. So they come to this place and they start begging, maybe even nagging. Hey, we need your stuff. We need your goods, right? And you can see that Herod becomes annoyed with that. They give up on Herod maybe at one point, and they go over to this other character, Blastus, who was the king's chamberlain. This was a man who managed Herod's household. And they figure, if I can beg him, if I can get his attention, then he'll get me in with King Agrippa. So they bribe, maybe they pay him off. Somehow they get some time with King Agrippa. And then there's all the people that would have been there. Imagine even in a theater like this, thousands of people that would have been there and understood what was happening. They all had maybe gathered here, maybe for some kind of festival. They were celebrating an emperor of some kind. All these powerful people here in the city. Herod's here, he's praised, people love him, and the people of Tyre and Sidon keep begging for him to give them either more food or some other rights, whatever it is that they're trying to beg for. So that's what's happening in the setting. Let me take you back to some place where Josephus takes us in Agrippa's life. It's when he was much younger. He was probably in prison at some point in his life, thrown in prison by a ruler named Tiberius, the name of a town where we'll be later today. He's in prison, probably in pain and grief because his dreams are shattered. This is years and years before. Herod Agrippa's in pain and grief because his dreams are shattered of being the great man that he hoped he would be. And this Josephus tells the story. Agrippa's leaning against this tree, and a fellow prisoner, a German man, comes up and speaks a sort of prophecy to Agrippa. He says to him, your pain will be gone. You'll be powerful and wealthy someday. You'll have great happiness. But above him is this brib bubbo. It's this black or some colored owl type looking bird who's in the tree above him. So as this German guard tells Agrippa, you're going to be powerful, you're going to be wealthy, and you're going to have happiness. He tells him all that, but then he says, if you see a bird like that one above your head again, you will have 5 days to live. I read the account for myself from Josephus' record. So then let's fast forward back to Acts chapter 12, verse 21. He goes on, sure enough, he becomes wealthy. He becomes powerful. He has probably great happiness. The prophecy came true. And Josephus tells us that before Herod died, as he explains the exact passage that we read here in Acts, that before he died, he came to a theater, perhaps this exact theater. He came into this theater. Some theories say that maybe he was in the Hippodrome. Either place, he's standing before all of these people, and definitely the people of Tyre and Sidon. He puts on his royal robe, Acts says. Josephus expounds on that. He says he puts on a garment made wholly of silver and contextually truly wonderful. He came into the theater early in the morning, at which time the garment was illuminated by the fresh reflection of the sun's rays upon it, showing it in a surprising manner. And it was so splendorous that it would have caused horror on whoever looked upon it. Imagine this powerful man, this wealthy man, dressed in some kind of silver garment, the sun shining, it's blinding to look at him, right? The power is overwhelming, the sight is overwhelming. And then he gives a speech, and Acts tells us that he gives this speech that is surely eloquent. They would have captured all of their hearts. Not only was he captivating in their eyes, but now they hear his words and they're blown away. They think it's a divine act. So they start yelling, the voice of a God, not of a man. The voice of a God, not of a man. Does he stop them? No, he doesn't say a thing. He lets them go on. You can imagine the theater. If it was this theater, the people just shouting, the voice of a God, not of a man. The voice of a God, not of a man. Overwhelming. Josephus, he writes two important details for us when he recounts this story. He says, presently his flatterers cried out from one place and from another, though this was not for his good, Josephus says. They said that he was a god, and they added, be merciful upon us, for although we have hitherto reverenced thee only as a man, you shall henceforth be superior to all mortal nature. And then the next thing Josephus recorded is, upon this the king did not either rebuke them, nor did he reject their impious flattery. That's where it all went wrong for him. At that moment, he should have said, no, stop, don't say that. But he didn't do that at all. Soon afterward, Josephus says, not rebuking the crowd for their flattery, he looks up, catch this, caught by the historian Josephus. Remember what happened earlier in his life. The prophecy about the bird in the tree. You see it, you'll have 5 days to live. Josephus recounts the story. Soon afterwards, he looks up and he saw an owl sitting on a rope above his head, and he recognized it as one of a messenger of evil, as on a former occasion it had been a messenger of good, and a pang of grief pierced his heart. Now listen, I don't know what the owl was actually like. I'm going to believe the Bible more than I'm going to believe Josephus, but I don't think that these stories oppose each other. The Bible tells us that immediately he falls dead. According to Josephus, he sees this owl, and then he is struck with a sickness, and then death comes 5 days later. That he has this internal sickness where it's almost as he's eaten by worms from the inside out. But I do know that the Bible captures this, at least at a high level for us, where this man who should have rebuked people for worshiping him as God now sees this owl, which perhaps could have been something like a messenger from the Lord, or at least a divine warning sign to say, you should not go there. Yet he did not stop it. And we know the Lord is sovereign over life and the Lord is sovereign over death. And at that moment, now that's the end of Herod Agrippa. Immediately he was powerless. Immediately he was struck in such a way where worms, it's explained through Josephus, were eating him alive from the inside out. You imagine if he was taken back to his quarters, that he heard the people, maybe still out on the streets, yelling, the voice of a God, not of a man, save us, we need you, right? But all the while he's in such pain and he's literally moving towards his death. Why? Because the judgment of God was upon him. He tried to take for a moment the place that only God should have. He should have been bold and said, no, that's not me. There's only one true God. He should have at least denied them, even if he didn't believe that. But he took the credit. And God turned the tables entirely on him. The very man who was killing James and arresting Peter and trying to stop the gospel, and was now quite literally stopped dead in his tracks. So what can we learn from this? I think the overarching thing that we can learn from this amazing story that probably happened in this place or somewhere close to it is that God opposes the proud. God opposes the proud. He gives grace to the humble, but he opposes the proud. By Solomon, this man who was rich, powerful, 700 plus women, he wrote, prideful himself at times, he still got in Proverbs 3:34 that God mocks the proud but gives grace to the humble. Peter, who had every reason to be proud, who some believed was even the first pope, right? Who had the ability to bring the gospel to Gentiles. He wrote in 1 Peter 5:5, God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. You might be sitting here today thinking, I'm not proud. If you just think that, you're proud, right? But you might think, I don't struggle with pride. Pride's not my problem. And I would say to you, in my life, though I have moments where I could struggle with pride, I think I struggle far often way more with inferiority or feeling not good enough than I do thinking I'm proud or better than everyone else. And I submit to you today that even if you see yourself as inferior, that's a form of pride. When we think about ourselves more than we should, when we compare ourselves to others, when we're not being the person that we should be living for the glory of God, that's pride. Ultimately, a humble person submits themselves to the rule of the Lord. They don't compare. They realize that they have enough in Jesus Christ. Let me poke at your heart for a second and say, do you have pride in your marriage if you're married? Are there areas in your life where maybe you're more about you than you are about serving your spouse? I know that I get there way too often. Is there areas in your work where maybe you have pride, you find more significance in your work than you should, rather than trusting the outcome to the Lord?